The Empathic Echo. By Thomas King. Front Matter. Chapter 1, Echoes of Chaos. The year is 2347. Centuries have passed since the cataclysm known only as the Time of Chaos reduced civilizations to dust and scattered the embers of humanity across a broken world. Yet, from these ashes, Ethelgard has risen, a testament to resilience and the reawakening of ancient powers. The world is not merely rebuilt, it is reborn, suffused with a magic that had lain dormant since the dawn of the 21st century. Arcane energies, once a whispered legend, now course through the land, weaving themselves into the very tapestry of existence. This new era is one of profound wonder, a delicate equilibrium found between the spectral echoes of the past and the vibrant, unpredictable magic of the present. Towering cities, crafted with a blend of salvaged pre-chaos architecture and nascent magical design, pierce the sky, while beyond their protective wards lie sprawling wildernesses teeming with untamed arcane life. It is a land of stark contrasts, gleaming spires casting shadows over ancient ruins, and the hum of enchanted devices mingling with the raw, untamed power of the natural world. The air itself thrums with a palpable energy, a constant reminder of magic's pervasive influence. It's in the gentle shimmer of heat rising from sun-drenched cobblestones, the peculiar phosphorescence that illuminates the deep forests at twilight, and the way storms gather with unnatural speed, crackling with an arcane intensity that predates the chaos. The reawakening of magic wasn't a gentle dawn, it was a tempestuous surge that reshaped landscapes, birthed new species, and fundamentally altered the way life manifested. Mountains that had stood for millennia were sculpted anew by arcane winds, rivers rerouted by surges of elemental force, and valleys bloomed with flora that pulsed with an inner light. These were not the subtle enchantments of old lore, but raw, elemental powers that sculpted reality with an artist's hand, albeit a chaotic one. The kingdoms of Ethelgard, forged from the scattered remnants of pre-chaos societies, now navigated this re-enchanted world with a cautious blend of innovation and reverence. Each city was a unique microcosm, a testament to the ingenuity of those who had survived. The grand city of Eridor, for instance, was a marvel of vertical engineering, its buildings spiraling upwards, connected by bridges woven from solidified light, a testament to their mastery of ethereal energies. In contrast, the seafaring city of Thalassa was built upon colossal, magically sustained coral reefs, its inhabitants attuned to the ebb and flow of ocean currents imbued with potent water magic. Each settlement, unique in its architecture and its primary arcane affinity, formed a complex web of trade and diplomacy, all striving to maintain the fragile peace in a world still healing. Beyond the cities, the wildlands were a spectacle of untamed magic. The whispering woods, where ancient trees communicated through rustling leaves that carried fragments of forgotten knowledge, were patrolled by spectral guardians born from the lingering emotions of those lost in the chaos. The obsidian peaks, jagged mountains that clawed at the sky, were home to griffins whose wings were imbued with the fiery essence of volcanic magic, their cries echoing through the desolate valleys. It was in these untamed regions that the rawest forms of magic could be witnessed, a vibrant, often dangerous, testament to the world's fundamental transformation. Life here was a constant dance with the arcane, a testament to the planet's ability to adapt and regenerate, even after catastrophic upheaval. The balance was delicate, a tightrope walk between harnessing magic's boons and succumbing to its untamed fury. The whispers of the past were ever present, a cautionary reminder of the power that had once brought the world to its knees, and the ever-present need for vigilance. This reborn world, Ethelgard, was a place of breathtaking beauty and profound mystery, a realm where the echoes of chaos had given birth to a new, magical dawn. The air in Ethelgard was a living, breathing entity, not just with the scent of blooming flora or the ozone tang of distant storms, but with the palpable hum of human feeling. For centuries now, since the arcane surge that followed the time of chaos, emotion had ceased to be a purely internal affair. It had found a voice, a form, a physical presence in the world, the sentient spirits of emotion. These were not the abstract concepts of ancient philosophy, but elemental beings, born of the deepest wells of the human heart. Consider joy, for instance. It wasn't merely a fleeting smile or a light-hearted laugh. In Ethelgard, true, unadulterated joy could manifest as a creature of pure luminescence, a salamander of living flame, its scales not of keratin and bone, but of solidified sunlight and shimmering heat. These creatures, often called sundrakes by the common folk, would dart and weave through sun-drenched meadows, their passage leaving behind trails of sparkling motes that felt like warm laughter on the skin. Their bodies pulsed with a gentle, comforting warmth, and their chirps sounded like the tinkling of wind chimes. They were drawn to moments of genuine happiness, to children playing, to lovers reunited, to the quiet contentment of a skilled artisan at work. A sundrake's presence was a beacon, amplifying the joy it found, creating a small bubble of effervescent delight that could lift the spirits of anyone nearby. They were ephemeral, often dissipating as quickly as they appeared, their existence tied to the peak of the emotion that birthed them, leaving behind only the memory of warmth and light. Conversely, the heavy cloak of sorrow, the profound ache of loss or despair, found its physical embodiment in the will-o-wisp. These were not the mischievous sprites of folklore, but melancholic figures born from the deepest wells of grief. They appeared as ethereal beings woven from weeping willow branches, their forms draped in shimmering dewdrops that never seemed to evaporate. Their eyes, if they could be called eyes, were pools of liquid moonlight, reflecting a profound, ancient sadness. They dwelled in quiet, secluded places, by still ponds, in the shade of ancient, moss-covered trees, or within the hushed halls of orphanages and hospices. The will-o-wisps rarely made a sound, their presence marked by a pervasive, but not oppressive, sense of quiet contemplation. The dew that dripped from their spectral forms held a strange solace, a gentle coolness that could soothe a fevered brow or ease a troubled mind, though it also carried a faint, lingering scent of rain on dry earth. They were drawn to those who mourned, not to inflict further pain, but to share the burden, to offer a silent, empathetic presence that whispered, "You are not alone in your sadness." To witness a will-o-wisp was to feel the weight of the world, but also the quiet strength of enduring. Anger, perhaps the most volatile and dangerous of emotions, gave rise to the iron-heart golems. These were not the crude constructs of clay and stone, but beings of raw, elemental fury. They coalesced from storms, from the earth's molten core, and from the sheer, unadulterated rage that could seize a person. Their forms were typically massive, humanoid, crafted from jagged obsidian and veins of crackling lightning. Their eyes glowed with the malevolent intensity of a forged fire, and their movements were accompanied by the deep rumble of thunder and the sharp crackle of arc electricity. An iron-heart golem was a force of nature unleashed, capable of leveling buildings with a single, enraged blow. They were drawn to moments of intense conflict, to the battlefields where desperation and fury reigned, or to the hearts of those consumed by righteous indignation. While their destructive potential was immense, there was a strange, almost tragic, beauty to them. They were a raw, unbridled expression of power, a reminder of the primal forces that lay dormant within the human psyche. Some scholars, venturing into forbidden texts, spoke of certain ancient mages who had learned to channel the destructive energy of these golems, to temper their rage and wield their power for defensive purposes, though such practices were rare and exceedingly dangerous. These were but a few examples. The spectrum of human emotion was vast, and so too were the spirits that sprang from it. Hope might manifest as a flock of iridescent songbirds, their melodies weaving spells of optimism. Fear could coalesce into a shadowy beast, its form shifting and indistinct, always lurking at the edge of perception. Love, in its purest, most selfless form, was said to birth luminous beings of pure light, akin to benevolent stars, though such manifestations were exceedingly rare, spoken of only in hushed legends. The intrinsic link between humans and their emotional spirits was the cornerstone of Ethelgardian society. One's emotional state was not just a personal experience, it was a public declaration. The intensity and nature of the spirits that accompanied an individual spoke volumes about their character, their current mood, and their inherent disposition. A bustling marketplace was a kaleidoscope of these spiritual manifestations. Merchants, brimming with the thrill of a successful deal, might be surrounded by a swarm of tiny, buzzing, breed sprites, glittering insects that pulsed with avarice, their presence often countered by the bright, fluttering wings of generosity moths, born from the benevolent gestures of patrons. Guards, perpetually vigilant and often hardened by their duties, might carry with them the stoic, grounded presence of small earth elementals, their forms resembling compact, sturdy boulders, reflecting their steadfast resolve. Children, their emotions a whirlwind of uninhibited expression, were a constant source of wonder, their play often accompanied by a riot of tiny, playful sprites, giggling sprites born of laughter, energetic sprites fueled by excitement, and sometimes, tearful sprites born of minor scrapes and disappointments. This outward manifestation had profound implications. It meant that in Ethelgard, one could not easily hide their true feelings. A person claiming to be at peace might be subtly betrayed by the nervous fluttering of a fear-wisp at their heels. A politician professing noble intentions might be shadowed by the subtle, insidious whispers of a deceit wraith, a creature of smoke and shadow that fed on half-truths. This transparency fostered a unique form of societal interaction. Trust was built not just on words, but on the observed congruence between a person's declarations and the spirits that accompanied them. It also created a certain social pressure. Those who frequently manifested negative or destructive spirits, those who were perpetually angry, jealous, or fearful, often found themselves ostracized, their volatile companions creating a palpable unease in their vicinity. The upbringing of children was intrinsically tied to the understanding and management of these spirits. From a young age, they were taught to recognize the nascent forms of their emotional manifestations, to understand that a surge of frustration could give birth to a grumble gnome, a small, stout creature that would stomp its feet and grumble incessantly, or that a moment of pure delight could conjure a glee spark, a tiny ball of effervescent light that would zip around their heads. Parents and tutors would guide them, not to suppress these emotions, but to understand them, to channel them constructively. A temper tantrum, if left unchecked, could inadvertently birth a destructive rage sprite, a small, chaotic entity that might cause minor damage. But with gentle guidance, the child could learn to temper their outbursts, transforming the nascent rage sprite into a more manageable vigor imp, a creature of pure, unbridled energy that would instead channel its power into boisterous play. This close relationship with their emotional spirits also meant that mental and emotional well-being was of paramount importance. Apathy, a profound lack of feeling, could lead to the birth of void shades, entities of chilling emptiness that drained the color and vibrancy from their surroundings, and from the person they were bound to. Prolonged periods of despair could create sorrow weavers, insidious creatures that would spin webs of melancholic thoughts, ensnaring their host in a cycle of sadness. Therapists and spiritual counselors in Ethelgard were not merely talking to their patients, they were observing the ethereal companions that flitted around them, using the spirit's behavior as a diagnostic tool, a tangible representation of the patient's inner landscape. The most profound and sought-after manifestations were, of course, those born from positive, elevated emotions. A truly acts of selfless sacrifice, of pure, unadulterated love, could birth a luminaria, a celestial being of pure, radiant energy, its light a beacon of hope and healing. These rare beings were revered, their appearances spoken of for generations. Likewise, moments of profound inspiration, of groundbreaking discovery, could give rise to insight elementals, ephemeral beings that shimmered with the brilliance of 1,000 ideas, their presence sparking creativity and innovation in those around them. However, this intimate connection was not without its dangers. The more powerful the emotion, the more potent and potentially volatile the spirit. A collective wave of panic, for instance, could result in the spontaneous generation of a terror horde, a swarm of skittering, shadowy creatures that fed on fear, their presence capable of inducing mass hysteria. Conversely, a shared surge of righteous anger could coalesce into a powerful fury storm, a localized tempest of destructive energy, capable of causing significant damage. These collective manifestations were a constant concern for city guards and mages, who were trained to anticipate and mitigate the impact of widespread emotional contagion. The existence of these sentient spirits of emotion fundamentally reshaped the understanding of the self. It blurred the lines between the internal and the external, the psychological and the physical. To be human in Ethelgard was to be a walking, breathing ecosystem of feeling and form. It was a constant, dynamic interplay, a dance between the seen and the unseen, the tangible and the ephemeral. It was a world where a smile could literally conjure light, and a tear could manifest as a pearl of solace. It was a world where emotions were not just felt, but witnessed, and in witnessing understood. And for individuals like Zan, who struggled with the very concept of emotion, who felt himself to be an anomaly, this emotionally charged landscape presented a unique and often daunting challenge. His own internal landscape was a mystery, a vast, uncharted territory, and the echoes of his suppressed feelings were the ghosts that haunted his own existence. The vibrant, ever-present spirits of Ethelgard were a constant, tangible reminder of the world's fundamental nature, a nature he, in his isolation, had yet to fully embrace. Zan moved through the bustling streets of Ethelgard like a phantom, an embodiment of the void in a world saturated with vibrant, tangible feeling. The cacophony of sounds, the riot of colors, the very air thrumming with the palpable energy of human emotion, it all washed over him, a tide he could not connect with, a language he could not speak. He was an orphan, yes, but that was merely a label for a condition far deeper, far more profound. His past was a gaping chasm, an abyss from which no memory, no flicker of recognition, no whisper of identity could be coaxed. He was a blank slate, etched upon by the world but bearing no inherent mark, no echo of where he had come from. His stoicism was not a choice, not a learned discipline, but an innate state of being. It was a shield, thicker and more impenetrable than any steel forged in Ethelgard's famed armories. He had learned early, through harsh, unspoken lessons, that any attempt to express what little he felt, a flicker of annoyance, a pang of hunger, a fleeting moment of unease, was met with confusion, with a subtle distancing from those around him. His attempts to mimic the emotional outpourings of others were clumsy, hollow imitations that served only to highlight his otherness. He learned to observe, to catalogue, to understand the mechanics of emotion as a scientist might study an alien species, but never to truly feel it. His isolation was not merely a consequence of his lack of memory or his stoic nature. It was a self-imposed exile, a tacit agreement with the silence that had claimed his inner world. The orphanages he had passed through, the temporary shelters he had inhabited, had all been places where his blankness was a peculiar kind of burden. Children's laughter would spark tiny, incandescent sprites around them, their innocent joy manifesting as miniature sunmotes that danced in the air. A scraped knee would bring forth a tiny, whimpering will-o'-wisp, its dewdrops echoing the child's tears. Even the sternest of caretakers might have a small, solid earth elemental, a pebble-like spirit, resting near their shoulder, a testament to their steadfastness. But Zan? Zan was simply Zan. No sprites, no elementals, no visible manifestation of an inner life. He was a canvas devoid of paint, a song unsung. He found a peculiar solace in the quiet corners of the city, in the shadowed alleys and the hushed libraries where the echoes of emotion were less pronounced. He worked menial jobs, sweeping floors, delivering messages, mending basic tools, tasks that required little interaction and even less emotional engagement. His employers rarely bothered to understand him, content with his efficiency and his silent obedience. He was a useful tool, an automaton, and in Ethelgard, where emotions were so intrinsically linked to one's being, this made him both an object of curiosity and a figure to be cautiously avoided. Children, with their unfettered instincts, would sometimes stare, their own boisterous sprites momentarily falling silent as they tried to comprehend the absence within him. Adults, however, would quickly look away, an unspoken discomfort settling over them. There were moments, fleeting and unsettling, when a strange sensation would ripple through him, a tremor beneath the placid surface of his existence. It wasn't an emotion, not in the way he understood it from observing others. It was more like a pressure, a building tension that seemed to originate from deep within his core. Sometimes, it manifested as a peculiar dizziness, a disorienting sense of his surroundings warping, stretching, or compressing. He would stumble, his hands flying out to steady himself against a wall, only for the sensation to pass as quickly as it arrived, leaving him breathless and disoriented. He had no explanation for these episodes, no context to place them within. They were anomalies, further proof of his strangeness, and he learned to suppress the nascent fear they evoked, burying it deeper within his already impenetrable silence. He had a routine, a predictable rhythm that kept the encroaching emptiness at bay. Mornings were for work, for the quiet hum of labor that allowed his mind to drift without consequence. Afternoons were often spent in the city's grand archives, a place where the air was thick with the scent of aged parchment and the hushed reverence for knowledge. He was not a scholar, but he found comfort in the sheer volume of stories, of histories, of recorded lives. He would trace the spines of ancient tomes, feeling the texture of the bindings, absorbing the quiet weight of their accumulated wisdom. He was searching, though he did not know for what. Perhaps he was hoping to find a reflection of himself in the narratives of others, a clue, a whisper of a forgotten past. One such afternoon, while poring over a particularly dusty and forgotten section of the archives, a peculiar tome caught his eye. It was bound in a dark, unadorned leather, devoid of any title or inscription. It felt unnaturally cool to the touch, almost as if it absorbed the ambient warmth of his fingertips. Intrigued, Zan pulled it from the shelf, a faint cloud of dust erupting around him. As he opened it, the air in the immediate vicinity grew heavy, almost suffocating. The familiar hum of emotional energy in the archives seemed to recede, muted, as if by a shroud. The pages within were filled with strange, angular script, unlike any he had seen before. It was not the flowing script of Ethelgard's scholars, nor the crude runes of the older civilizations he had glimpsed in other texts. This script pulsed with a subtle, almost imperceptible energy. He found himself drawn to it, a strange compulsion to decipher its meaning. As he focused, his eyes tracing the intricate lines, a faint shimmer began to emanate from the script itself. It was as if the ink was alive, imbued with a hidden light. Suddenly, a wave of nausea washed over him. The shelves around him seemed to warp, the rows of books blurring into streaks of color. He felt a dislodging, a profound sense of being untethered from reality. It was as if the very fabric of space around him was rippling, distorting. His breath hitched, and he instinctively clutched the book, his knuckles white. Then, as abruptly as it began, it ceased. The world snapped back into focus, the shelves solid, the air still. He was breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs. But more than that, he felt different. A subtle shift had occurred, a resonance within him that he had never experienced before. He looked down at the book, his gaze intense. The script on the open page seemed to glow brighter now, the angular lines almost vibrating with an unseen force. He felt a strange pull, a sense of recognition that defied his lack of memory. It was as if this script, this forgotten language, was somehow connected to him, a forgotten echo of his lost self. He carefully closed the book, the coolness it exuded now seeming to seep into his very bones. He knew, with a certainty that unnerved him, that he had stumbled upon something significant, something that transcended the ordinary emotional tapestry of Ethelgard. Leaving the archives, Zan found the world outside to be subtly altered. The vibrant manifestations of emotion, which he usually observed with a detached curiosity, now seemed more pronounced, almost overwhelming. A nearby merchant, haggling with a customer, was surrounded by a flurry of small, shimmering, breed sprites, their avaricious buzz a constant thrum. A child, having dropped an ice cream cone, was accompanied by a miniature, weeping will-o-wisp, its dewdrops catching the sunlight. These were familiar sights, yet today, they felt amplified. He realized with a jolt that the strange, disorienting sensations he experienced earlier, the warping of space, were not entirely unfamiliar. He had felt echoes of them before, in moments of intense stress or unexpected shock, but never with such clarity, never so directly connected to an external object. He walked with a new, almost frantic purpose, the mysterious book clutched tightly to his chest. He needed to understand. He needed to find answers, even if he didn't know what questions to ask. His stoic facade, his carefully constructed wall of silence, felt like it was beginning to crack. The pressure he had always felt beneath the surface was building, not with the chaotic energy of anger or the damp chill of sorrow, but with a potent, unnamed force that seemed to emanate from the very pages of the book. As he navigated the crowded thoroughfares, his senses, usually dulled by his detachment, seemed to sharpen. He noticed subtle anomalies he had previously overlooked. A beggar on the street corner, his hand outstretched, was not accompanied by the usual low-level sprites of despair, but by a fleeting shadow that seemed to writhe at the edge of his vision. A group of guards, their faces grim, seemed to carry an oppressive aura, not just of authority, but of a coiled, ready tension that felt unnatural, even for them. It was as if the world, for him, was suddenly revealing layers previously hidden, a deeper, more complex reality that his usual state of emotional detachment had masked. He found himself drawn to the quieter, less populated areas of the city, seeking refuge from the overwhelming sensory input. He ended up in a secluded alcove overlooking a small, forgotten park. The trees here were ancient, their branches gnarled and moss-laden, and the air was still, disturbed only by the gentle rustling of leaves. He sat down, the mysterious book resting in his lap. He ran his fingers over the cool leather, a sense of dread and exhilaration warring within him. This book, he was certain, was the key. But to what? A forgotten past? A hidden power? Or perhaps, something far more dangerous? He opened the book again, his gaze fixed on the glowing script. He concentrated, not on understanding the words, but on the sensation, the energy that pulsed from them. He tried to replicate the feeling of dislodgement he had experienced earlier, the warping of space. He focused his intent, a silent command echoing in the void of his mind. And then it happened. The air around him shimmered. The ancient trees seemed to bend and stretch like taffy. The ground beneath him felt like it was dissolving. He felt a powerful pull, not from the book this time, but from within himself. It was a sensation of immense, raw power, surging and untamed. Panic, a sensation he rarely experienced, began to bubble to the surface. He tried to suppress it, to rein in the burgeoning energy, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with bare hands. The power thrashed within him, seeking an outlet. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Then, with a jolt that sent tremors through his very being, the sensation abruptly ceased. The world stabilized, the trees standing firm, the ground solid once more. He opened his eyes, gasping for breath. He felt drained, as if he had run for miles, but also invigorated. He looked down at his hands, his fingers trembling. They seemed to glow with a faint, residual light. He had done this. He had caused this. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. He, Zan, the silent orphan, the anomaly of Ethelgard, possessed a power that defied the very nature of his world. A power that was not tied to emotion, but to something else entirely. Something fundamental. Something he had suppressed for so long that he had forgotten its existence. He looked back at the book, its script now quiescent, but its presence still thrumming with latent energy. He finally understood. This was not just a book of forgotten lore, it was a key, a catalyst. It had awakened something within him, a slumbering power that had been dormant for years, perhaps even since his forgotten birth. The silence that had defined him was not an emptiness, but a contained immensity. His stoicism was not a lack of feeling, but a deep, ingrained control. He was not a blank slate, he was a reservoir, waiting to be tapped. The implications of this discovery were staggering. In Ethelgard, where emotional expression was the very foundation of existence, where spirits manifested from the heart's deepest wells, he was an anomaly. His power was not born of joy or sorrow or rage. It was something else. Something ancient and profound. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, not of fear, but of a dawning, terrifying purpose. He was not merely an orphan lost in time. He was something more. And the world, with its vibrant symphony of emotions, was about to learn the true meaning of silence. The echoes of chaos, long dormant, were beginning to stir, and he, Zan, was at their epicenter. He was the orphan of silence, and his awakening would shake the foundations of Ethelgard. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers he could not yet comprehend, but for the first time in his life, Zan felt a sense of direction. He had found a piece of himself, however fragmented, and it was a power that promised to rewrite not only his own story, but the story of the world itself. The cool, almost sterile air of the abandoned clockmaker's shop did little to soothe the tremor that ran through Zan's hands. He kept them clenched, hidden within the worn fabric of his trousers, as if by sheer force of will he could contain the tempest raging within. The book, that unsettling harbinger of his awakening, lay closed on the workbench, its dark leather seeming to absorb the meager light filtering through the grimy window panes. It was a focal point, a tangible anchor to the intangible chaos that now threatened to consume him. He had always known he was different. Not just the gnawing emptiness where memories should have been, or the profound inability to connect with the vibrant emotional currents that defined Ethelgard. It was something deeper, a fundamental dissonance with the very fabric of existence. while others' emotions flickered into visible manifestations, sprites, wisps, elementals. His own inner landscape remained a stark, silent void. He had learned to interpret these outward displays, to catalog them like an observer of exotic fauna, but he had never been able to produce them. His silence, his stoicism, was not merely a preference, it was a desperate, ingrained effort to suppress a primal force that he instinctively knew was dangerous. This suppression, he now understood with terrifying clarity, was the source of the strange pressures, the dizzying sensations, the warping of reality he had so long experienced. It was the constant, exhausting exertion of holding back a river with a dam built of pure willpower. Each flicker of an uncontrolled impulse, each moment of fear or frustration that threatened to breach his control, sent ripples through the stable world around him. He had learned to plaster over these anomalies, to dismiss them as personal failings, further evidence of his inherent brokenness. He had associated this hidden potential with his lack of identity, with the abyss of his past, believing that to unleash it would be to truly shatter what little self he possessed. The book, however, had shattered that illusion. It hadn't given him power, it had merely acted as a key, unlocking a vault that had been sealed from within. The script, alien and pulsing with a life of its own, had resonated with something deep within him, something that had been waiting, dormant and unrecognized, for millennia. It was a language of fundamental forces, not of feelings, and it spoke to a part of him that existed beyond the emotional spectrum of Ethelgard. He paced the dusty floor, the silence of the shop amplifying the frantic thumping of his own heart. He replayed the moment in the archives, the disorienting lurch, the sense of being untethered. It had been terrifying, yes, but beneath the terror, a nascent flicker of something else, a profound, unsettling recognition. It was the feeling of coming home, of finding a lost piece of himself, albeit a piece that was wild and untamed. "It's a part of me," he murmured, the sound of his own voice startlingly loud in the oppressive quiet. He had never spoken aloud about these sensations, even to himself. The fear of acknowledging them, of giving them form, had always been too great. But now, the truth was undeniable. This hidden anomaly, this power he had so desperately suppressed, was not an external intrusion, but an intrinsic aspect of his being. The effort of maintaining this suppression, he realized, had been immense. It was a constant, draining battle waged on the very edge of his existence. Every breath he took, every step he made, was an act of defiance against the primal energy surging within him. He had been like a coiled spring, wound so tightly that the slightest disturbance threatened to send him snapping in all directions. The constant vigilance, the mental and spiritual fortitude required to keep this force contained, had undoubtedly contributed to his detached demeanor, his perceived lack of emotional resonance. It was not that he couldn't feel. It was that he had been so singularly focused on not unleashing what lay beneath. He paused by the grimy window, gazing out at the narrow street. A vendor was hawking his wares, his voice a melodic chant designed to attract customers. A small, translucent bargain sprite flickered around him, its wings beating a rapid rhythm. A child skipped past, a trail of giggling joy sprites, dancing in their wake. These were the vibrant tapestries of Ethelgard, woven from the threads of human emotion. And Zan, he now understood, was a thread of an entirely different color, an anomaly woven into the very fabric of reality, not just its emotional surface. His power was not born of joy or sorrow, love or hate. It was something far more fundamental. It was the ability to manipulate the very framework upon which these emotions played out. He could, he suspected, bend time, warp space, compress moments, and stretch eternities. The thought was both intoxicating and terrifying. The control required to navigate such forces, especially without a guiding emotional compass, was immense. Without the inherent anchors of joy or grief, fear or love, what would prevent him from becoming a destructive force, an agent of pure chaos? The fear was a cold knot in his stomach, a sensation he recognized as a primal instinct for survival. He had spent his life avoiding attention, blending into the background, a ghost in the bustling city. To wield such power, even unintentionally, would draw the kind of scrutiny he had always shunned. He imagined the reactions of the people of Ethelgard. The awe, the terror, the inevitable attempts to understand, control, or perhaps even weaponize him. His otherness, already a source of unease, would become a legend. He thought of the subtle shifts he had noticed earlier that day. The way the beggars' shadows seemed to writhe, the coiled tension around the guards. These were not manifestations of emotion, but perhaps echoes of his own suppressed power bleeding into the world, creating subtle distortions in the emotional aura of others. It was a frightening realization. His internal struggle was not a private war. It was a force that rippled outward, affecting the world around him in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the book. It felt like a conduit, a means by which he could begin to understand and perhaps even direct this dormant energy. He needed to learn. He needed to master the control he had so rigidly enforced, not to suppress the power, but to guide it. It was a daunting prospect. His education had been one of survival, of menial tasks and quiet observation. He had no teachers, no mentors, no texts that spoke of such primal forces. He looked down at his hands again. They still held a faint, residual luminescence, a testament to the surge of power he had unleashed. He had done this. He, Zan, the silent orphan, had manipulated the very fabric of existence. It was a truth that settled upon him with the weight of centuries. His entire life, his isolation, his perceived emptiness, had been a prelude to this moment. The book lay on the workbench, an enigma waiting to be deciphered. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he could not simply return to his life of quiet obscurity. The dam had been breached. The river was flowing. And he, Zan, had no choice but to learn to navigate its currents. The echoes of chaos were no longer distant whispers. They were a roaring tide, and he stood at its very precipice. His journey had just begun, and the path ahead was a landscape of untold power and unimaginable peril, a journey into the heart of his own hidden anomaly. He was an orphan of silence, and the world, whether it knew it or not, was about to hear his song. The air in Ethelgard, usually alive with the vibrant hum of its people's interwoven emotions and the playful dance of their spirit companions, had begun to carry a subtler, more disquieting resonance. It wasn't an overt threat, not yet, but a pervasive undercurrent of unease, like the tremor of distant thunder that promises a storm. This nascent disquiet was most palpable in the hushed conversations that rippled through the marketplaces and taverns, stories traded like contraband, their authenticity questioned even as they were eagerly consumed. Outlying villages, usually self-contained pockets of cheerful existence, began sending hesitant delegations to the capital, their faces etched with a shared worry. They spoke of unsettling anomalies, of livestock behaving erratically, of crops wilting without apparent cause, and of an unnatural stillness descending upon their forests, a silence that felt heavy with unspoken dread. These weren't the typical disturbances that could be explained away by a capricious elemental, or a localized bout of collective melancholy. These were deeper, stranger disruptions, like a discordant note struck in the symphony of Ethelgard's magical ecology. The seamless integration of humans and their spirit manifestations, once the cornerstone of the kingdom's prosperity and unique charm, seemed to be encountering unforeseen friction. It was as if the very nature of these bonds was being tested, stretched thin by an unseen force. Sprites that usually mirrored the exuberance of children were becoming sluggish, their luminescent forms dimming. Guardians, typically stoic sentinels of public order, reported fleeting moments of inexplicable panic, their spectral forms flickering with a nervousness that belied their training. Even the most mundane of emotional spirits, those that painted the air with the everyday feelings of the populace, seemed to be losing their vibrancy, their colors muted, their movements listless. It was as if the vibrant tapestry of Ethelgard's shared consciousness was beginning to fray, its threads becoming tangled and dull. In the hallowed halls of the citadel, where the kingdom's leaders grappled with the day-to-day realities of governance, a different kind of tension was brewing. The usual political machinations, the careful balancing of factions and the perennial debates over trade routes and treasury allocations, were being overshadowed by a growing undercurrent of strategic posturing. Whispers of old alliances being re-examined, of patrols being subtly redeployed along the northern borders, and of clandestine meetings taking place in dimly lit chambers, painted a picture of a kingdom bracing itself for something more profound than mere regional unrest. The Royal Council, accustomed to dealing with tangible threats and predictable challenges, found themselves adrift in a sea of conjecture and unease. The outlying reports, though often dismissed by some as local hysteria, were accumulating, creating a pattern that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The scholars and lorekeepers, those who delved into the dusty annals of Ethelgard's history, found themselves increasingly sought after. Their secluded studies, once filled with the quiet rustle of ancient parchment, were now frequented by anxious envoys and worried noblemen. The questions they were being asked were no longer about historical precedents or diplomatic protocols, but about prophecies, about forgotten ages, and about the deeper, more potent currents that flowed beneath the surface of recorded history. It was in these hushed exchanges, amidst the scent of aged paper and dried ink, that the seeds of an ancient prediction began to germinate, spreading like wildfire through the rumor mills of the kingdom. A prophecy, once relegated to the realm of myth and fanciful tales told to children, was resurfacing. It spoke not of a specific event, but of an era of profound upheaval, of shifting paradigms, and of a crucible that would test the very essence of Ethelgard. It alluded to a time when the harmony between the material and the ethereal would be strained, when the veil between worlds would thin, and when forces long dormant would stir. The prophecy described a great unraveling, a period of chaos that would precede a reweaving, a complete transformation of the kingdom's spiritual and physical landscape. Some interpreted it as a harbinger of destruction, others as a prelude to a glorious new dawn. But all who spoke of it, even in the most carefully guarded whispers, acknowledged its potential for unparalleled peril. The specific wording of these ancient texts was as varied as the scholars who unearthed them, yet a common thread ran through them all. They spoke of a time when the emotions of the world would become a tangible force, capable of shaping reality itself, and when a child of the void, one born without the typical spiritual resonance, would be the fulcrum upon which the fate of Ethelgard would turn. For centuries, these passages had been interpreted allegorically, as poetic metaphors for the cyclical nature of peace and war, prosperity and famine. But now, with the strange occurrences, the fraying spiritual bonds, and the palpable sense of impending change, these cryptic verses were taking on a chilling new significance. The concept of a child of the void resonated with a terrifying resonance, for it hinted at an individual who existed outside the established magical framework, an anomaly capable of either immense destruction or unparalleled salvation. The political landscape, always a complex web of alliances and rivalries, began to shift under this growing unease. The northern territories, sparsely populated but strategically vital, were becoming a focal point of concern. Reports from these regions, often filtered through layers of bureaucracy and local gossip, spoke of an increase in unsanctioned magical experimentation, of unusual energy readings detected by arcane instruments, and of a growing number of individuals exhibiting signs of extreme emotional instability that could not be attributed to typical spiritual influences. Some factions within the court, ever eager to find external threats to rally against, pointed to the neighboring warlord states, suggesting a coordinated destabilization effort. Others, more cautious, warned against scapegoating and urged a deeper investigation into the kingdom's own internal dynamics. The queen, a shrewd and pragmatic ruler, found herself caught between the conflicting pressures of her council. Her intelligence network, usually a well-oiled machine, was struggling to provide clear, actionable information. The anomalies were too widespread, too subtle, and too unpredictable to be easily categorized or countered. She commissioned private investigations, dispatched discreet emissaries, and poured resources into arcane research, all in an attempt to understand the nature of the growing discord. But the answers remained elusive, shrouded in mystery and speculation. The very fabric of Ethelgard, once a source of its strength and uniqueness, seemed to be developing fissures, revealing the hidden depths of its potential vulnerabilities. In the underbelly of the capital, in the labyrinthine alleys and hidden chambers where information flowed more freely, if less reliably, the whispers of the prophecy were becoming more insistent. Soothsayers and street mystics, their pronouncements usually dismissed as charlatanism, found themselves surrounded by crowds, their words amplified by the collective anxiety. They spoke of celestial alignments, of the convergence of ley lines, and of the awakening of ancient powers. The narrative of a coming era of profound change, once a faint murmur, was now a clamorous chorus, its melody a symphony of apprehension and anticipation. The kingdom of Ethelgard, basking in the perceived glow of its magical renaissance, was unknowingly teetering on the precipice of an era that would challenge its very foundations. The echoes of chaos were no longer confined to isolated incidents. They were reverberating through the heart of the kingdom, a prelude to a tempest that would reshape its destiny. The question was no longer whether change was coming, but what form it would take, and whether Ethelgard, or indeed its people, would survive the forging of their new reality. The serene surface of their world was beginning to crack, revealing the turbulent currents churning beneath.